And somehow, some way, we are back. It is the summer of 2023. We finished shooting One Giant Leap in February 2020. My math serves about 3.5 years later, and yet we made it after international worldwide pandemic, editing issues, production issues. We have walked through the fire to get to this point, but it is an honor for us all to be here today. Just a reminder, I am Ian, and this is the great One Giant Leap crew. It is a pleasure for us to be here, and we're just going to be filming some conversations about what filming the show is like, what our perception of the story and how it kind of influenced our life at a really critical time, right as we were going into some darker times in our life, and how that may have buoyed us or how it could have just been a natural part of who we are. I'll speak personally, it certainly was, but I just want to welcome each person and thank you, the audience, for being here and watching us. So, how you guys doing? I mean, it feels pretty good to be here, right? At the end of the day, I have no idea how we got here. We did it. We just built a studio in our living room. I mean, come on.
I haven't seen any of you since we stopped filming and I left. I haven't seen any of you since that moment. So
Ian, you kidnapped me and I woke up here.
That sounds like something I may have done. I need a built-in buddy to play roles for you, you know?
Yeah, Chris has been here a long time.
Setting up the whole thing though, it just came back, you know.
I was busy.
Well, I think when COVID happened, we had just finished the show and we were just going into post-production, right? And I know this is going to sound weird for folks in the audience, but if you've never made an actual play before, now's a really good time to do it. Back then, and it's going to sound weird, it was only 4 years ago, but the technology that we're using, you could do stuff and live produce it 10 times easier today. So God bless you for that. But here we are. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask some of the players just some questions, and I'm just going to hopefully have a cool conversation about One Giant Leap and go from there. So I will hand this question out to the audience. Whoever wants to take it, we can do it. What is one of your favorite moments about us walking through the muck and the mire that was our studio setup? Because that's what's top of mind for me right now, because we just had to build it here in the living room. Can you give me a great story of what it took to build in that studio place?
So getting there one day, Ian comes up to us. We have all the gear all set. It was heavy too, ready to go. And he's, guys, the elevator's broken. And there was an old building in South Boston, like around there.
Somerville, right?
Yeah, Somerville. And just, there's no AC in this building. It's all all the stairs are slanted in ways that are not helpful at all. Yeah. There actually used to be more members of OGL. Half of them died.
They died. They're still there.
Yeah.
Survival of the fittest.
It was probably one of them was named Craig. It's for the best.
Was that the first session or no? That wasn't the first session, right? I was gonna say that would have been a nightmare.
It was one of the, I feel like
Originally played Tane.
To your point, Chris, where we were running a little late because it's very stressful. There's multiple cameras, all this audio, all the beautiful backdrops that our wonderful Emily, put together for us. You go in this rickety freight elevator that blatantly hasn't been inspected. You know what I mean? And
Down the driveway with 2 parking spots.
Yeah.
And then park on the street around the
Parking.
corner.
That's terrible.
Such a good call.
Yep.
Oh my God. And then the button's not working. I remember having to call the lady being like, and then realizing we're in deep trouble. We'll come fix it. We'll come look at it. And I'm like, oh my God. So we had to go up 4 flights of stairs with hundreds of pounds of equipment. And we were already on the clock. Yeah, that's a great call. Does anyone else have anything classic? Because the parking thing just jogs.
Yeah, it was a nightmare to get to, because also Somerville, for anybody who's not from the Boston area, is a nice but older town, just like everywhere in Boston. So the streets are super narrow, the buildings are old. The building was beautiful, by the way. It's for the building's credit, it was very pretty on the inside, and
the architecture's great.
The architecture was beautiful. It just was definitely a million years old and not intended to be for a YouTube show.
An actual play.
It being haunted was a bonus, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, speaking
Haunted
of
by
being
jazz
haunted, how many times did haunting jazz music come from the other side of the wall?
Oh yeah, there was
It might as well have been haunted, right?
What was it? Was it a class?
No, it was a piano studio
Yeah.
below us.
Yeah, it was just like a studio.
And then, but it wasn't just piano. It was like at one point a full frickin' orchestra. I'm kidding, but like it was like actually it wasn't haunting. It was beautiful.
It was like an area of gathering for people who actually have talent.
Yeah, there's real studios in there.
That just cut me deep.
Wow. I said people, not an Adonis.
Oh my god. You just made up for it in one fell swoop. No, but I feel like, with that sort of jazz studio that was right there, I remember vividly, I think, was it the scene, Jared, where Legs is hacking the computer? And this spoiler alert. If you haven't seen it,
Wait.
blame me.
I do hacking?
Yeah. Where you're hacking,
hacked so
we're up,
hard you hacked
we made it
off
to the
your
top of the tower. You're hacking the witch's computer, and all of a sudden, dun 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 dun.
I
Like, from the other room, like,
Is that what someone's phone?
I'm in.
Out of context, you were hacking the witch's computer like, oh, so this is a recipe for kids.
Was it picked up by the mics? Did they?
oh yeah, you can hear it in the show when you watch it. You can absolutely hear it. And we actually, I feel like in the show we comment on it too. We're like, oh man, what the hell?
What does that sound?
Yeah. Oh, well, it is. Okay, so obviously getting in the studio, bringing it all up, setting a studio for a bunch of amateurs, all of us, I think we're all that. But we did it, right? And we had a schedule, we had a plan, we executed it, we had our food and everything. I think, we should all be really proud of that. But then the process of actually filming the show. One Giant Leap, there's, an interesting world for you to explore. Your characters were really the first members of a theoretical first golden age in our species. So I'd love to hear what your process was like as players creating characters in that setting. 'Cause that can be really hard. Sometimes like in a Call of Cthulhu, which you like and I don't, but it's like, oh, you're really dark, it doesn't really matter, you're screwed anyway. Where in this is like you have this incredible platform of human achievement. What was it like to create characters in that setting? I'd love to hear from you guys for sure.
Like, I think it's very funny now. Looking back, I can speak to this idea of like, this golden age of humanity, and I thought, what is the ideal person or like situation that I could think of? And I thought like, oh, a child who's a doctor who could cure everything. Little did I know that we were really going to need some support in that area. So like Saoirse was truly before her time. So I was thinking a lot about like, medicine and the health of the world way before all of that. So it was very funny post-production thinking about Saoirse in the year of our Lord 2020. She would have been a huge help.
Would you have changed that she cured cancer or that she cured COVID?
She cured COVID.
I think people would have been mad about that one.
Well, I think the reason why I think Saoirse is a beautiful character in that setting is, think about it. Saoirse was born into the golden age, whereas someone like Arnold had experienced some of the fallout, right? He was still like jaded, whereas you'd see nothing other than the greatness of our collective harmonious achievement, more or less, in conjunction with Earth. As a matter of fact, I believe you were born after the Earth sentient. So essentially, you are the perfect representation of what it's like to grow up in that golden age. I think the level of achievement and genius, I think what can be achieved. I think Saoirse's like, because she didn't lose any of her passion. Like Saoirse gets into fights.
Yeah, if anything, she was
gives
overly
enemies
passionate.
funerals. Like she has a very strict compass, and that's why I love Saoirse as a character for sure. Anyone else? I'd love to hear. Yeah.
I know that for Nora, it was really fun designing her because at the time I had been doing. I was still in school and I had done a semester on Nantucket Island.
Yep.
And so I kind of based her background around that and this idea of being alone on this series of island doing ecology work for so long. Being there while I was designing the character really gave this ability for her to have more grounding in the world. And I really enjoyed building her that way because I was like, yeah, she's just a character that like any true scientist just wants to go do their work and doesn't want the rest of the world to interfere. And so getting the opportunity to then leave the world and all of the annoying humans behind was ideal for her.
So with Nora, the development of sort of the Adunian wrist device, right, where you could communicate with sort of an interface of Earth's intelligence, or at least not necessarily like in somewhat of a conversational way as well, and you almost forged a bond or a friendship with the Earth, and you were related, spoiler, to Adewale Dune, who's a core character in the show. Yeah. So I feel like you had a really interesting connection with the planet, and ultimately, when you take a step back, you can look at One Giant Leap as the first pairing of peers at the planetary level, right? And your connection, I think, with Earth came into play a whole lot of times with the site in the Yesterdays, your connection with the witch, right? The trial having like the really only core thread, you know, throughout to the point where they realize that's what the day the bomb was dropped on Mars. I think about passion, you know, fire. Like Nora, I feel like this is quantitatively and objectively the right thing to do. And you just weren't willing, I think, to budge on that. I really admired Nora's character. And certainly the way that Kayla, you played it. We actually, before this, we were just watching like the first like TikToks. And the one where she's, this is how I would terraform Mars. I'm like, are you Nora?
Well, I mean, if anybody needs any help.
Actually, this should happen 2 years later because Mars is closer to...
Yeah, the orbital pattern of Earth and Mars, they would have been closer, so the trip would have been shorter.
Indeed.
She was just thinking economically.
Did you name Nora after Dr. Freeze's wife?
I don't think so.
Okay, just asking.
Well, anyone else? I'd love to hear about all your characters, really.
I know that for me, when we first, when this was still a passion project, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, we had started a group chat of hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is the synopsis of what the story is going to start out, what the knowledge that your characters will have. Yep. Here's the list of roles that are going to need to be played. Yep. And so I remember all of us sort of went through and was like, oh, I think this would be good. I think this would be good. Oh, actually, I wanted to do this, but Emily, you actually might be the better chief medical engineer. And then so going from just the role itself, knowing that I was going to be a more technological engineer type character, but it was still the golden age of humanity. I was trying to think of who would Earth send on a mission to Mars, and who better than just some not average Joe, but just some guy who's really, really freaking good with his hands and his legs. That yeah, probably not good with his legs. But yeah. Yeah, I made my own. And then trying to just think of who I wanted to base it off of. Honestly, I just went with memories of my grandpa. Yeah. And just
which turned out to be a fascinating.
Yeah, and then
I wasn't even aware.
Spoiler alert at the end.
I definitely wasn't aware of that. So that was just one of those beautiful coincidences we find in tabletop stories.
Kismet.
Yeah, I mean, Legs stands out for me in a lot of different ways. I think Legs is a really special character. I think for me, there's two really interesting moments I think converge in the story. This is in your trial. Remember how you were given a polymath's paradise in what we thought Mars could have been, and everything went wrong, and you had to no matter what your genius was, you had to the whole engineering thing was, it's not about being an engineer, it's about dealing with failure.
Yeah.
So then there was that, and then you confronted a person who literally failed that same thing in The Wolf, and you were able to sit down with him in the firewall and essentially have those conversations. And you roll the 2 20s in a row to convince the story's main villain. I'm sitting here oh my god. To me, I think that arguably the most touching scene I think in the whole show, where in the way that I think you played it, I think it was fairly extraordinary. Where it was you didn't say, this is what I want Legs to do. And by the way, if you hear a 3-year-old, please know that you are not hearing things. Where essentially
it's just the jazz
you spoke as Legs to me really eloquently. I think folks who watch and love the show, that's one of my favorite moments, is where essentially you have to disarm the main antagonist, or at least up to that point the main antagonist, you could argue. Beautiful, just absolutely extraordinary character.
The real antagonist.
Always.
Going to the moon.
What about you guys?
Let's see. I mean, I was kind of a mess, physically, mentally, in general. But I mean, I had just had a kid. A month before starting filming, I had just started a new job.
Well, it's really easy, right? Just having
and then coming up and then trying to create a character, that's in this amazing story was really tough, and I didn't have a lot in me to invest in it as much as I wish I did. Okay. So I have some regrets, but I think what I was inspired by was the rate at which AI in real life is expanding, and now 3 years later we have ChatGPT and all that kind of stuff. It's like, wow. So I had, spoiler alert, the character Marcus is an android. He's fully robotic. And obviously I took inspiration from like Data from Star Trek, Commander Shepard from Mass Effect, and I tried to combine all these unique characters and make it unique. Sure. I did my best, but easier said than done. And then the history of I feel like no matter what I say, I'm going to spoil the crap out of the show.
Spoilers, everybody.
Yeah.
If you're watching this before watching the show,
It's a weird choice.
Yeah.
hi, I'm Jared.
Yeah.
We meet for the first time.
Yeah, I think for me the most intense scene was on the moon with 13, Marcus's brother, and having that.
Two sides, because remember right before that during the conversation with him, you were given your memory back that you were the bomb that destroyed DC, and then you realized that he was the one that destroyed Mars Prime. And that he was, in fact, quite literally your brother. Yeah. Not like, oh, hey, brother, with a lowercase b, like capital B.
Yeah, that was a really intense scene. Right. For me, that was the most intense for my character, and interacting with that NPC was just like, holy crap. Yeah. This is crazy. To
stop him from committing suicide. And then eventually, Dr. Gallagher eventually heals him. Using her powers, I think we're actually like going in the final like battle or something like that, or maybe right before that, and he ends up being a valued member of the crew, and actually he survives in the show, so he canonically is on Earth. He's here all over upstairs, like driving my poor mom wild.
Sucker.
Oh man.
Just got thrown down.
Oh my god.
What did he just
look at all that? He just threw everything downstairs.
Who could have done this?
All of a sudden, you just hear like a bureau topple over.
It's like daddy daycare. Look at all that.
What's happening?
All right, what about what did you find, folks?
All right, so I made Arnold kind of like I make all my characters immediately last minute when I just get like, all right, I got. Yeah, very leading character, barely reading the rules. I can't read. But he turned out to be very fun. He was kind of goofy, kind of based him off the dad from the animated Tarzan movie a little bit. Okay. And some like other characters, some books I've read. But he was kind of supposed to be this like chummy like professor character, like, oh, I can solve that in spiffy and then eat jam or something. But and then he kind of turned into like people who are or present as happy or joyous tend to be sad, and they tend to have legitimate reasons to be sad, which kind of went over. So when Arnold got serious, it was a serious moment, but I also love playing goofball characters, so I like getting away with whatever I want in this, and I think I was able to do it a little bit. However, the moon is still there, and I will regret that more than anything.
Well, there's a bunch of Arnold moments. I'd say probably 80% of our TikToks probably involve in some way. There's two. Obviously, one of the funniest things was you convincing me to use perform to pilot the ship as it was crashing.
I'm very convinced.
But you gave a good story. Remember, like, but in the trials, I went to the pilots, and I'm just mimicking them. I'm like, all right. I mean, the AI is really intuitive. I mean,
I can convince you a turtle can keep dancing too.
All right, convince him that didn't just happen.
What didn't just happen?
And then I think, obviously when we got interactive with the firewall, and everyone is like, seamless. Like, I want the sort of impenetrable defense, or I want to be able to cure anything. Yours, like, I want my wife back. And I think that kind of like really is a great symbolism for sort of the torturous past of Arnold's character, because he's by far the oldest, right? Yeah. He actually lived at a time on Earth where we're just starting to come out of the fallout and sort of the horrific time that would have been. Now, he wasn't necessarily alive, or he was, but like not an adult for the worst of it, definitely not. But he would have certainly had an appreciation for how far we've come, more so than anyone else.
No, I on the risk of being like too much, I didn't want to actually latch onto that pain, but I wanted to kind of have an allegory to people that grew up in the 90s.
I knew it. I knew. God damn it, Chris. All right, Amula, what about you and Asima?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of I didn't have a whole lot of experience like creating super complex, varied, crazy characters. So like,
Back then, you had only really played with me like in one-on-one. Now you've played a lot. Like in the last 3 years, we've played almost a ton. Back, it's a good point. Like this is like probably your 4th ever character.
Yeah,
back then.
maybe.
Something like that.
even less than that. So I just kind of like went with what I knew, you know, creating like a warrior, protector, guardian type character, because also like, you know, being able to be combat proficient is fun.
Yeah, you don't do that in the video games that you play. You never just put it on easy mode and then like literally over level the hell out of your characters, get every item in the
Never.
game, do every quest,
Never.
and they're just so ungodly powerful. It's a joke. You never do that with your game.
After D&D, every boss, you'd be like, okay, can we loot it now?
Yeah, exactly. The Abula experience, just very on point.
What about their stuff? Can we get their stuff?
100%. I mean,
Combat master.
I think a scene.
There's still a bad guy over there. Yeah, you get him.
I think there's definitely a few moments for me with Asima. I mean, for me, like during your trial, doing like the battle of like Vercingetorix, or the battle of Alessia and Vercingetorix, and like having to win that was really interesting. But I thought, you know, obviously though, we actually just watched a little bit the elevator scene where I see Asima's the strong silent type. She's not like Rana is a genius, like flashy NPC, which we'll get to in a second. But I see Asima as like, if you wanted someone to like cockroach survive and like defend no matter what, just have that willpower and that skill, I feel like Asima would do that, and with an like just an incredible talent level. But the scene where you decided to speak, like really seriously speak in the elevator when there was very serious conflict, like a tower had just been eviscerated by a mega bolt of lightning. And by the way, that was when Tane went down too. We didn't know if he was alive because he was in the Titan suit.
I think that's why we were fighting about it, because Saoirse was like, we have to go save him no matter what.
Right.
And Asima was like, that's going to jeopardize literally this entire mission and the entire world. No pressure.
I threw a lot at you all. Before we get into some of those things, we had 3 NPCs that came along with us. We had Anjali Reddy, who was the first officer. She was an incredible character. Unfortunately, she did not survive. I think that was actually pretty fair. She probably should have died sooner, but I wanted to give her a death befitting of the life that she led, and I wish we could have delved more into that, and maybe in like subsequent seasons we'll be able to do that. Obviously, we had Tane Nata as our chief communications officer, and I actually feel like, in a strange way, Legs, you took a lot of his role once he left. Like, a lot of the sort of therapeutic communication, diplomacy, I think, ultimately fell on you in those moments because we didn't have a choice. But Tane definitely had a lot of that until he was like, you know, he could sort of, his mind got a little bit polluted. And of course, the greatest of all time, Rana Al-Masri, right? The great pilot in the Centurion hat, like everyone had a crush on Rana, like the absolute goat herself, right? So were there any moments with any of the NPCs, whether they're on our crew or whether you know, they're in the world, like Cetos, for example, or any of the Trinity, that stand out to you? Like any of those moments? I'd love to hear your perspective there.
Spoiler alert, my grandpa being one of them was pretty shocking.
That's true. Stop trying to blow up the earth.
Grandpa, stop!
He had been given access to the Iris by Mars in her guilt, which was not among her wisest decisions, I would say. But that, I mean, the one that says to me, like, when I said that, there was really 2 moments. They're both the witch, and they were both with Nora. Nora first on the Rainbow Bridge, because Nora, what were you pissed about? Nora was pissed about something, and she walked
I was always pissed. I
onto
was
the
just
invisible
angry.
bridge.
Seriously,
and then
probably just bitter.
the witch materializes from the heavens in front of you, like looking like almost like Storm in the X-Men, and you're just like, oh my god. And then when you finally have that climactic battle with the witch, and you had literally had a 1 out of 36 chance of beating her, and you did it, because she rolled an 11, and you had to basically roll the crit. I mean, that was extraordinary. Like, oh my god. Like, that's in the final episode. I was like, these guys are just destined to win.
I still think I could have fixed her.
Agree.
Did you have a nice little tea party with your dead wife?
Now, honey, I know. Be open-minded. I don't see any red flags here at all. This is charming.
I'd love to hear beyond that, I'd love to hear, some other experience like Rana just walking through the desert or whatever. Like, I'd love to hear. Do you remember any of those off the top of your head?
I feel like, I mean, Saoirse's obsession with Rana in general was a great part of the character and a great part of like the connection that I feel like she had with the crew. But I will say when she returns back to the group, when we think she's dead, we're not sure where she is, she's crashed, and you see her just like coming over the hill with her helmet, and it's like, I feel like that is exactly who that character is, really. And so it was like kind of this penultimate moment for Rana, especially because at that point Anjali had already died. And I think there was this real worry that like all of the NPCs were not going to make it. That like Tane also easily could have died. So I think at that moment I was like, oh my god, thank god Rana has lived. That I would not have been happy if she died.
Saoirse in the whole with death.
Yeah, she would have been so mad.
I think you actually phrased it specifically, like, I want to remove or defeat death. It was very explicitly death oriented, which I thought was you like essentially having control over death. That was your thing. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think the way I had thought about it early on is that Saoirse was so removed from the trauma of watching the Earth go through this like intense pain, and also has this kind of like understanding of medicine, and is so young and has already done so much, that she really believed that like death was the enemy and like the problem to be fixed. And that was kind of the way that I thought about the character all the way through, was that she's really, her idea of herself is that she's not just going to cure cancer, she's going to cure like death in general. And that's why it was her dream. Curing death, yeah.
I see Dr. Gallagher. Think about it. If she's that educated and that ahead of her time, remember Sight into Yesterdays, right? Which is a really interesting thing. I would imagine you would have bathed in Sight into Yesterdays to motivate yourself. Yes, you didn't personally live through it, but it's not, so you didn't have necessarily the first-hand experience Arnold did, but I'll bet your character was motivated by the fact that you are now the bulwark in this sort of genius golden age generation that is going to stop this from happening again, and your role is stopping the death part. I think that's really interesting. Actually, that's a really good conversation around your powers, right? Because everyone, essentially with the iris, getting access to essentially convert what they call potential energy into matter, you all had access to powers. We just talked about yours, removing death. All of you had individual powers. Does anyone want to comment on what those powers were? Why that was the thing that came to mind, maybe? I mean, I'd be super interested to hear how that sort of materialized for you.
I forget mine.
Oh, thank God! I didn't want to be the first person to say it, but I did not remember. Like,
It's been 3 years. I think mine was. I think Arnold just got ripped.
No, he just brought his wife back. That was it.
Like a wife is
Selfish.
a superpower.
You got your wife back. You got to you got to control the method of how you passed away. So you essentially got to become part of technology. You had an impenetrable like bulwark shield. You, I feel like, got to control the atmosphere, right? You got to become a part of nature because you picked the same thing the witch did.
I did what I did in every game. I just wanted to be a druid. That's all I wanted.
A tempest druid, essentially.
Yeah.
I think the reason why I chose mine was because Marcus had never been able to choose his fate. It had been chosen for him from the start. He was created for a purpose. He executed the purpose. So at the end, towards the end of the game, I'm like, what would Marcus want most? To control his ending, because he didn't have control from the start.
Your power was the last veteran. That's what it was.
Yeah, it's the last veteran.
Because you actually fought, and everyone's like, marvelous, how did he stay so young? And it turned out, well, it's not.
Well, yeah, right. So he, his initial memories are all fake and implanted. He, what was it, 2040s, where the nukes go off and basically World War III starts. He fights in World War III. He helps develop the Predator suit, this crazy background, but most of the memories are fake. And then, through time, he's known as the last veteran, and is entrusted with embarking on the mission. It's pretty intense. So I think once the memories come back to him, 13, and he realizes what the hell he did, and the deep amount of remorse and guilt and all those feelings, and that was the choice.
Yeah, I bet that's what influenced it, because 13 was in the lab, Nora was working on helping him, because we couldn't turn him back on, because remember he was that razor thin difference between him being alive and death by suicide, tragically.
Right.
And you, I think, had just been through that. And so when the time came to make the decision, I would imagine that you're right. That's totally top of mind to make that choice.
Right.
That's fascinating. I'm trying to remember legs too. I mean, I've seen this like 10 times.
Something
I
about
can't-
technology.
Did you become like a technomancer?
No, I know what it was. It was bridging the connection, bridging the gap. So your choice was the power to bring two sides together, and that's how you earned the opportunity to speak to the wolf.
Right.
That's what it
Yes.
was. And so in that scene, you maximize the opportunity. Remember, you were sitting on the swing at the playground and there's in the sand, and you drew the symbol with him as a child. So you disarmed him by making him a child.
Yes.
Because that's what your power. It was a beautiful scene. It was an incredible scene. That's what it was. Bridging the gap.
Now that
Yeah, I mean, what an inspired choice for sure. And then the 20s, and I was like,
Well, I guess they win.
sometimes the dice tell a story, sometimes we tell a story, sometimes the dice and the story that I want to tell are the same story.
You've made the right call. Children are really easy to fight.
what about Amula? What about you and Asim? Was it just more like what's going to be the best utility, or was there more of like anything else? Any other layers?
There's like she wants to be the protector. She wants to be the guardian. She wants to not save everyone in the same way that Saoirse does, but like to protect, right? So that's kind of where it again. It's more so basic, but like an impenetrable shield that allows for.
To escape alive.
Yeah, because I remember we were getting bombarded by. And so we were able to like make it to the ship.
That's right.
Yeah, we were able to like make it to the ship because like there were like I was able to put shields all around.
Right.
So yeah, it was mostly just about like keeping her crew safe and
that's
alive.
what it was, too. It's because remember how the all reds isn't an energy weapon, but it's like the Photoshop erase tool where they could just erase matter. And then there was like violent rays of sunshine, and they were just doing this inside, but there was like a ton of them, and then your shield essentially blocked that out and allowed us to go. And you actually, I remember in that scene, you had critted to follow Cetos, who had because remember that's when we figured out he was Curiosity, which to me was one of my favorite reveals that I had known the whole time. Is he was the Curiosity rover exposed to the Iris, and the Iris essentially brings that out of you. It says, okay, so if his mission as the Curiosity rover is to be curious, right, then he needs to become this being which absorbs information in a curious way, and that's how the Trinity got him. They realized that about him after all these, whatever, and then this is the only way to fulfill that mission, and then you followed him, and then he got away, which was fascinating. But Cetos, what a character, because he was fascinating. It was Arnold who was sitting there like breaking down Latin word cells because he had written on his paper language, which isn't even technically a skill. And I'm like, all right, because it happens to be the perfect thing in this moment, because it was Curiositas, Latin for curiosity, and then shortened to Cetos, right? And like that moment, I remember for me, it was like I had built up to this, like I had goosebumps.
Like, if you didn't realize this at the very beginning, I pulled everything out of my ass. I was asleep. I was asleep most of the time. I'd been working from like 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and then going there, and like I don't know if they cut it out or not, or if there's a compilation, but it's just me going.
Oh, there will be. You did the best you could. You can the way you can tell this if Chris is really sharply dressed, he's probably very tired. in the videos. Okay, so obviously we encountered a lot of dilemmas, right? Moral dilemmas, right? Which I think is befitting our species having achieved that. So to me, the one that really stands out, I think, is kind of like the two-parter where we meet Mars, and Mars essentially shares with us that she knows Earth ordered the code red against itself because she herself had committed the same crime, which is why there's no advanced life on Mars, or at least none of her design, right? Whereas Earth had survived, right? Like sapient life had survived, although gone through the great calamity and the tremendous evil of the fallout. So when you realize that was true, like your relationship, for example, with Adewale Adu, and you realize all the evidence is pointing that you facilitated that. It may have been Earth's idea, but you facilitated the death of functionally 2 billion people, and obviously everything else. But then again, also the rebuilding of society on top of that, and with the core being the Adun machine and the truth that it gave, and obviously giving birth to the sentience that we now know of as Earth. when you guys had that moment where essentially you realized that you were going to have to make the decision about the future of not just Mars and not just Earth, but both of them together as peers and as civilizations on both, that's a lot to put on your shoulders. Your characters being the best of your age or not. Anyone's shoulders at any time should have at least some sort of moral dilemma and wrestle with that. Do you remember what that, I mean, it's been years now, but do you remember what that was like? I loved creating that as a moral dilemma, so I'd love to hear if you remember what that may have been like for your characters. Or for you as players.
I remember it being kind of difficult for like Nora especially, because like being an ecologist at her character and everything, it was a lot of like, she had seen so much of the pain and like the hurt that humans did to Earth, and like her whole job was living in these remote places and trying to bring them back to a habitable ecosystem. And she wanted to do that when she went to Mars as well, is to bring life back to a planet. And learning that the planets themselves were like, we needed to purge this almost infection out of ourselves. She really understood that and was like, I think you're making the right choice. And I think she sort of has always struggled with the acceptance of her family's involvement in it, and especially learning how integral they were to the destruction of their planet.
But also the rebuilding of it.
And also the rebuilding of it. That was the thing. She was like, it wasn't that bad, because all it did was it cleared away.
Just the 2 billion deaths.
Yeah, everything was fine. Exactly. So she was, for her, like, though, like, I didn't, like, personally agree with her decisions all the time, it was a lot of, like, the character trying to be driven by, like, this logical conclusion based on the evidence, because that is how Nora was always trying, even though she was very emotional about it.
No, that's fair. Anyone else?
I think Arnold is on the opposite end of that, where he wanted Adun dead, because, and I think this is kind of valid, like, you don't get to call something a golden age after you've made it by butchering innocent people. Like that, I don't, and I don't think Arnold does. That cold calculus of that is abhorrent to any sort of human progress. Even say like, oh, if we do this, the world would be so much better. Like, not better for those 2 billion people. Indeed. And even if it is better, even if you do that, you still need to pay for the things you do. And
I think the end is sort of, ambiguous, or I don't pronounce that right, but you get what I'm saying, like, in terms of what you did. Yeah, you didn't get to stab him. I believe you. I'm 99% certain they stopped you. But in terms of what justice might look like, but the problem is he'll say, listen, fine, like, you now get to make the decision, but you can't punish a planet unless I'm very mistaken. So Earth technically was like, listen, I literally had no other choice. I suffered through this up to this point. You can say they were innocent, but as my job as the protector of all life, if this were to continue, all life would cease. That was essentially Earth's thesis. It had reached the point of no return, and therefore the decision had to be made. Now, it'd be really interesting to think, like, in a season 2, as a society, kind of watches the site in the yesterdays that you all put together for them, how that might go. And I think to that end, remember before we left Mars, going back to Earth, and you guys took time to not repair society, but to truly begin that process of healing. You may not remember the things that you did. There's a few things that stood out. I remember Asima was like doing building and development, but Nora, I think you were doing a lot of like education. Yours was more like benevolent propaganda. Like, we're here, like, remember you're bridging the gap, that sort of thing. That sort of thing. Obviously involved in quite a bit of healing before we yeeted the iris into space and blew it up. Although, to be fair, it wouldn't work on any planet outside of Mars, but, still, probably too powerful for humans at our point of evolution just to have that active. But I'd love to hear, like, where you think, based on where it ended, where you might want to take it. Because if we're successful at this show, and people are like, yeah, you guys are pretty cool. The show is pretty dope. The story's good. I'd love to see where it goes next. And by the way, outside of it, we've been playing a campaign that isn't these characters, but really establishes some really hardcore truths about the future of these worlds. But I'd love to hear from you all as players, not your characters, of what you might want to flesh out in like an OGL season 2, right? Because remember, you see it in the intro, like, one giant leap means, right, taking the right to leave the nest. The leap out of the nest is what One Giant Leap is really about. So what would that look like to you? What would you want to explore? Selfishly, like, if you could control it, like, what would that look like? I'd really love to hear what you guys have.
I think an easy through line is we shot something off into space. That's gonna land somewhere. Either we need it again, or it's gonna fall into the wrong hands, or there's gonna be something that draws us further out into space. Like we had to leave the nest to go a couple planets over. Well, what if now we need to go to the next light system over?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And knowing what happens in the kind of the consecutive story that we recently played that wasn't filmed, based off of that story, seeing some of these characters, if not all of them, return and explore the consequences of the fallout of that, and then potentially, like Jared just said, like going further. Right. Knowing the information from the news story, like going further as this crew would be pretty interesting.
999, slower than light drive, so you can go pretty far, and then humans could probably build on top of that. So you can probably figure out how to break that light speed barrier.
And also the technology that might be unveiled from that consecutive story might even make it.
These characters having to deal with that at a whole nother level. I mean, apologize for the audience, the folks who didn't play that, but like, we go to Proxima Centauri B. It's different.
It's saved by a British man.
I mean,
ironically, that's actually not a joke.
19th century British man with no teeth.
I know as much as you do.
So as players, what other things would you guys want to flesh out? I'd love to hear.
I think a lot about like what I was saying before with Saoirse being kind of like having this obsession with death. And I would love for that character to, like, there are very two clear paths there. Either she double down so that she gets older and gets more entrenched in like medical science, kind of becomes more of like a mad scientist, and the idea of like really being obsessed with death.
Now you felt it, you lost the power. How do I get it back? That type of situation.
Right. Or also like, this idea of like death is the enemy, because the ending of the show, the reason it's so ambiguous and it was really difficult for us to make the decision is because there is no bad guy. There is no like one guy who is the bad guy. This is the person that we're going after. Like Dune could be seen as a bad guy, but he is only working on behalf of the Earth. Can the Earth be a bad guy? All those questions. And so if we are looking at it from Saoirse's perspective, she could take it as death is the bad guy. Death didn't exist. We didn't need to deal with that. Or the exact opposite, seeing like the Earth knew that the only solution was death. What do I do with that?
Oh, interesting.
So like, I think that would be I don't know what I would choose necessarily for the character, maybe dependent on like what the Earth looks like and what she experiences, however many years.
Because what comes
Right.
after the golden age?
And how old is she would make a big difference, and she's so young. If we jump just like 5 or 10 years, she obviously is going to have a really different perspective on life.
No, that's a great point. I love that, especially because society is going to change. There would be sort of these inflection points of evolution in your character as humans watch the SIY reconcile with what happened. Like, are we living on a false reality? I think, will that be a destabilizing factor? Will it be a uniting factor? I think there's so many interesting things to explore. What about
false reality?
I definitely think for Nora, getting off-world would be probably a good thing for her, as her whole family is now target number one. Having everyone know.
Be a hero. Nora would for sure be a hero.
I don't think she'd feel like one.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think Nora would feel that she's made a lot of she had to make a lot of decisions, and she may not in time agree with everything that she believed then moving forward.
Yeah.
I think because she spent so much time not wanting to be a part of her family, not wanting to address it, that now being in such a public eye, people knowing who she is in connection to her family, and then also any amount of hero that she gets associated with after the fact, I think she would still feel so responsible for what has happened in the past that I think that she would just want to cut ties completely.
Right.
And with this new technology and with the human race looking to move outward into space, I think the idea of both leaving and exploring new environments and ecosystems would be
No, 100%.
so fundamentally fascinating to her.
You know where I see Nora in the interim before like we get the Avengers, signal like we all need to regroup again?
Yeah.
Is you would probably, I'd say you'd like be an ambassador who goes back to Mars and learns what they've all built with the Iris. That doesn't go away just because the Iris. Once matter is matter, it's matter, right?
Yeah.
So you plus they terraformed. You could basically reverse engineer a lot of that tech because if you're going to be an interplanetary explorer, maybe like it echoes a lot of the terraforming tech. I bet
Nora's hands
Nora
are all
built it.
over that.
would have probably built it, which is fascinating. 100%. And then obviously that's just like, maybe it's a stepping stone. Once you feel like you have the technology and the experience, and it's like, all right, let's go to Proxima. Let's go,
I could genuinely see her viewing the next few years, like her creating this terraforming tech and then getting like the Avengers signal and her just being like, have I turned into my grandfather? Like, am I just like, because now I'm terraforming world, so it's like I'm changing the course of history. So it's like, I don't know how I feel about this
A
anymore.
lot of planetary reconciliation here. What about y'all?
Well, what is the Earth except a slightly bigger moon?
Please.
You can't stop me again.
Or you can go find other moons that you can.
know.
The Moon Destruction Laboratory Simulator.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Goat Simulator on Steam.
Just lives in a holodeck, just blowing up moons.
Reliving that day.
Just pouring a glass, having a cigar. Computer play, blow up the moon.
Again.
Playing for the 513th time today.
I see Arnold as being in the awkward position of having to answer questions about a being that you fundamentally disagree with while being the ambassador type. Remember, you were the chief cultural officer,
That's
true.
right?
Yep.
So I feel Arnold actually, and having just had that super intense experience with your wife before she, passed away again, I see Arnold having a tough time at first. I think Arnold would need something to ground him back.
Cult.
Start a cult.
Moon cult.
Remember your trial, where basically you went into a tribe where you can't speak the language, but you had to help them. Was it find water, fire? Is that what it was?
Something like that, yeah.
So maybe you would have.
So find the nuclear launch codes this time.
Please don't. What about you three?
I mean, I think all of us, I don't want to speak for you guys, all of us came away after the story with serious trust issues. But I think Marcus in particular probably would have retired permanently from the military, would have become a whistleblower, made all the truths known to the entire population of both Mars and Earth, and would have started a movement to make sure that, moving forward, the same mistakes wouldn't happen again.
That's really interesting that you say that, like the idea of going underground. Thinking that, like, what of our characters would take on the like celebrity hero profile? Would they all?
Rana
would we
would.
be seen?
Rana
Right.
is used to that, I think.
Right. There's definitely a lot of us that I think would be kind of even skyrocketed even more into celebritydom.
Absolutely.
And then, but like, it's super interesting that like you disappear. Like you would go undercover, because you're trying to rail against.
You in 13, like starting like an underground revolution.
Yeah.
Right.
You know who would have been the
Predator,
worst
Bigfoot.
position is Tane.
You're who's
Remember, he
walking
was in
around the woods?
he was like a leaf in like the Children of the Earth,
Right.
like a bishop
Oh, yeah, the
level,
weird-
Yeah, it was like a religious.
the-
pseudo religious order.
The vegan cult.
Oh, yeah,
Tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, actually, probably not in Tane's case. But think about it. Like he's spent his whole life essentially not worshiping, but like fomenting appreciation for the Earth, and then all of a sudden he realizes the Earth is more or less responsible.
Right.
That must have been. Oh man, I can only imagine the sort of paths diverge in a yellow wood for him. Anyway, that was is that even the poem? Did I say that Robert Frost thing? Anyway, Legs and Asima, I'd love to hear what you think your characters could head. Prior to the Avengers signal going out, we got to get the band back together and roll in trouble.
So we gotta find the captain first.
Huh? Yeah, true. Oh, I'll make it work.
I feel like he wouldn't be fully underground. I mean, he'd be advocating for artificial intelligence. more
responsible
yeah, like he's a civilian, working his butt off to make.
Part of the revolution.
Yeah.
I have terrible news. They're doing the same program on the moon.
Multiple moons.
So many moons.
They went to Jupiter.
It's the perfect place for a devious plan to hatch.
We have to do it again.
Yes, I'm
But
sorry.
on Jupiter.
Sorry, Mr. Frodo.
Legs, Asima. What about you guys?
I think Legs would probably take like a front man, like come home and be like, oh hey, oh shit, this is cool. Taking any of the jobs, helping, and like would want to be the front man, but not out of just like not out of like celebrity status, but out of like, oh, I can get a lot done being in like the spotlight.
Right.
Like
You got access to any resource you want.
exactly. Like would use it to like build the network and connections to still be like to kind of keep tabs on everyone and everything like as best as I could.
You know, it'd be a really interesting scene that just popped in my head as you guys were talking is obviously Anjali passed away, right? And given you gave the eulogy, she would come back, and because she actually died, she would be the biggest hero.
Right.
So she would be given maybe the most publicly available sort of worldwide funeral ever, and like that'd be like maybe like that's like 2 months in, it's the first time you all see each other, and then that's the sort of prequel scene to season 2 is like you then go all your separate directions, and then that's the inciting moment for when years later, like that's the last time you saw each other, was this worldwide broadcast of Anjali's funeral.
And then we get the post-credit scene of all of our phones just going beep 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 in the future.
Would it be a phone? Probably just be in our head at that point.
To reality.
My predator brain.
Arnold.
I don't want to hear about AI.
Arnold's old and he dies despite Saoirse.
I literally asked him, like, is it Arnold?
Hey, Frankie Gallagher. Some goober. Live.
Asima, what about you?
So it's obviously it's two different perspectives of Asima the character and then me a player, having also played that additional.
Yeah, I mean.
You know what I mean? So from Asima's perspective, she probably wouldn't want to be super or in the limelight all that much. She'd probably want to still be in the background and the doing the usual strong silent type routine. But I think as a player, I'd be curious to see what the, not fallout per se, but like what the consequences would be of us deciding to release the truth about everything that happened, right, to the entire population, and how does that affect, the populace as a whole, and is there any dissent that like arises as a result, and like in her kind of protector like role, does she now have to apply any of that like kind of combat and tactical expertise to anything that arises as a result?
Scenarios are going to have to be updated now that we know there's extraterrestrial society.
Yeah.
And then like as a player and like knowing what happened in that other game that we played, you know what I mean?
Everyone's like, what's this other game?
Yeah. It's like what happens?
Season 2 is based on some of the information that comes out in Echoes. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's real extraterrestrial first contact.
That we're doing.
Yeah.
I was like, what happened in there?
This is like the whistleblower David Grush level like stuff.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
So that brings up an interesting point too. Like, this is the golden age, so to speak, of humanity, and hearing the news that it's built on just the foundations of just butchery. What's worse, that people get mad and try to burn what they have down, or that they don't do anything because they're too comfortable?
Exactly. Reconciling all that, I mean, everyone is going to have to come to terms with that. And that's why there's going to be this sort of seismic shift in society's direction by virtue of that decision that y'all made at the very end, which I thought is a very noble decision. It's like, you could, remember, I think we were debating, like, should we hide this for everyone's comfort? And I think ultimately you realize that this was the one giant leap, is facing our past head on and reconciling it. And that's what you made. And then you made fun of me for making that reference at the end. Because I said it out loud.
I'm so nice to you, though. I would never.
Well, I think we've had a really wonderful discussion here. It better not be the last one. So how about this? Watch a lot, God willing. Please like, and if you want to watch some more OGL, this wonderful group of players, just playing stories, having a good time, bring them to you, to just do what you can to support. And obviously any and all helps, and we genuinely appreciate it. But just from the bottom of my heart, and having been, all these years later, it's just wonderful to see you all in person. It fills my heart with joy, and I just can't wait until we get to do it again. All right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's do it. All right, ready?
If you guess how many times I fall asleep, you win a prize.
Yeah. A big prize.
Or I'm lying.